Yeah, I'll introduce Aaron.
Hi, Erin.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Stephanie.
No, no, that's okay. I was
Yeah,
just, hi,
yeah.
Laura. Welcome.
So
Um,
anyway, our next speaker is Aaron Reedy from Data Classroom, which I am a massive advocate of, by the way, Aaron. I think it's awesome. And a lot of kids this year, well, more and more kids are starting to use Data Classroom. And for me, I just think Aaron provides a great resource. He's easy to contact. He just has been a big advocate of our program, which we thank you for, Aaron. And with that, I'll turn it over to you so you can tell them all the super interesting stuff about Data Classroom.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the introduction, Carrie. And yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be talking to y'all this afternoon and showing you around Data Classroom. I'm just going to kind of start at the beginning and in this next half hour, just kind of give you an idea of what Data Classroom can do and a little bit as well some of the sort of intention behind some of the design. And then hopefully at the end of this half an hour session, you'll kind of have enough to start playing on your own. I'm going to share my screen, and I guess I want to start by asking a question before I screen share. If just if you wouldn't mind sharing some of the challenges that you've maybe encountered when having your students work with data, whether it's something related to graph making or communicating their results or um, working into statistical tests. What are there any challenges that you've experienced when having your students work with data?
Some of the comments that came up in our morning session, Aaron, are experimental design
Mm-hmm.
and choosing the appropriate statistical test were two topics that got a lot of press this morning.
Okay. Well, those are two biggies. Experimental design. I have I think I have a webinar, a recorded webinar on experimental design. I can send that to you all as well. I see in the comments seeing exemplars. I imagine that with working with data and presenting data, it sometimes is just so helpful to just see how it should look at the end, and then you just kind of have the concept in there. With experimental design, one of this is a topic I could go on for some time, but I think that if I had to sum it up, I think that beginning with the end in mind is the sort of most important tenet of experimental design. And by beginning with the end in mind, you're literally picturing what will the graph look like at the end of this that's going to answer my main research question, and then going backwards, from that point. So everything's leading up to collecting that data that you're going to need to place on an X and Y axis to answer that question that you have. And then the choosing statistical tests, I think, is often really intimidating. But I think in reality is something that is relatively straightforward, because the question you are asking determines the appropriate statistical test for the most part. There's some subtleties, and this is the kind of thing that scientists can argue about a lot in the peer review process. But part of the reason why they can argue about it for a long time is because it often is a matter of opinion in the end. It's not necessarily that there's one right answer, but there's sort of a set of right answers, and getting toward that set of right answers again is just largely very, very dependent on the question you're asking, and that is part of the logic that we built into statistical testing in Data Classroom. So I'm going to share my screen. Any other challenges that you want to share? You can either just jump in or drop it in the chat. Oh, I know sorry. I'm trying to figure out my Zoom. I had my my gallery window expanded, so I wasn't said I was sharing my screen, but all I was seeing was us. But now I see us. And I'm just going to resize that a bit. Okay. Well, at any point as I'm going, please feel free to just jump in and ask me questions in real time if you want. If you don't feel like unmuting yourself, you can drop something in the chat, and I'll try to keep an eye on that. This is the Data Classroom dashboard. Data Classroom is at its heart a tool for working with data. I think the most powerful things you can do with it are, you or your students are bringing in your own data, and you're working through an analysis to answer a question. Having said that, we also do have this library of preloaded data sets, and they're on a variety of topics. You can see the purple, orange, and tan tags kind of tell you, what it's about, what grade level we think it's appropriate for, what subjects and schools it might align with well. But there's a bunch of different data sets here. I think we're closing in on 100 data sets in the library now, but we're always adding to that. I'm going to open the same one that I showed the group on Tuesday, this Life on the Edge Biodiversity of Coastal Habitats in Nova Scotia. And this is a Data Classroom data set. And it's organized, when we say data set, it is both literally the data set that you see here that I'm kind of scrolling through, where the variables are organized into columns. Each variable gets its own column. Each independent observation gets its own row, and that's called tidy data format. That is the industry standard for science and analytics in business. So this I think is a good habit to get your students in, is to formatting their data in this way. It also makes statistical analyses downstream easier, because you can plug an entire column into an equation, which usually operates by asking which variables you're wanting in your model. But anyway, so the Data Classroom data set, there's this data set. There's also a place for attachments, and these become different tabs. Any of our pre-made ones, you'll see this attachment is called assignment. And this is an embedded Google Doc. It can also be an embedded Google slideshow. It can also be an embedded PDF. You can do anything you want with these attachments as a teacher. You can make your own assignments. You can customize ours. Ours always sort of follow this formula where there's background, and there's the data set is defined, and the variables are defined, explaining sort of what the numbers mean, what the categories mean. And then there are activity questions that students will work through. When they're working through these, they're most often going to be in the graph tab. And this is sort of the heart of Data Classroom. This is where you do most of your work with data. We firmly believe that you should graph your data first before you go on to anything more complex. Even before you do things like calculating averages, we think you should make a data figure. A lot of times in practice, it's not always done that way. I think oftentimes the sort of tools we have get in the way of that for students. But I really can't express how strongly I am committed to that idea of you should make a graph first. And this is the same for if you are a sixth grader or you are a PhD student. Like I think you should start by looking at a graph of your data. And to do that in Data Classroom, you can see the variable names are arrayed across the top here. And if I pick a variable that I'm interested in, I click the show button, and it will visualize there. And actually, this activity has had some things preset, but at first it would just look like this. So this is blank, and you add a single variable, and it'll look like this. And the default when you add a numeric variable is to show it as raw data points, where each observation in your data set gets its own data point, so that students can get an accurate picture of the variation that is in this data set. If they want to look at this a different way, it's very easy to toggle through different graph types. And so I'm on the control panel here at the right. You can see if I click over to this graph, you can see now we're looking at these data as a histogram. So this and this exact same data, but just showing it two different ways. So it's easy to toggle back and forth between those. You can also do things like add descriptive stats, and that's what I had done already in there. And this is showing you a mean and standard error of the mean, or here's a mean and 95% confidence interval, or here's a median and the interquartile and the range. And I can show multiple things at once on this graph if I want. But the idea is that initially students are just looking at raw data. And when they move into these kind of abstractions that I call pre-statistical thinking, things like averages and medians, they're able to see the relationship of those to the dots. And now, of course, if they want to, simplify this and, present just a bar where the height is the average, they can do that. But we want them to go through that process of looking at the data first and then moving on to a more abstract way of representing it. And then, of course, you can start adding variables and complexity. So if I add habitat to this plot, you can see I took that pile of data points and I split it into two. And so now we can see, which data points were from the exposed habitat, which were from the sheltered. If I want to look at it in a different variable entirely, you can see I'm going to queue up a bunch of these over on the control panel. And it's showing you what is active is in red. So I've got habitat on X and species richness on Y. But I can switch around and I can put, here's location on X and species richness on Y. Or maybe I want to see evenness on Y. Or maybe I want a numeric on X and a numeric on Y. So you can just quickly toggle through different graphs in a way that I think is challenging to do in other tools, just because they haven't been built with that being a goal in mind. To avoid just monologuing here, I'm going to pause for a second and just see if we have any questions.
So Aaron, I just quickly signed myself into it,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really easy, and it's apparently free, I guess. Is that right?
Well, it is. We have some features that are free always, and then we have other features that are licensed. But it is my understanding, and Stephanie, you can stop me if I'm wrong, but this is an audience of all people who are covered under your Maine State Science Fair license. Is that correct?
Yeah, there will be a few of them signed up after I sent you the list.
Okay.
But so if you're in that boat, one of the people who kind of signed up for the sessions, a la carte sessions, then we'll get you into the system. So I just wanted to mention that Aaron and the folks at Data Classroom have given us a pretty big in-kind sponsorship, so that we can offer it to all of our teachers and in turn their students for free for the year.
That's what I was going to ask. Is it available to my students, and do they set up their own individual accounts?
Yes, and you as a teacher, what I recommend doing is creating classes, and from the dashboard, I'm gonna leave this data set and show you on the dashboard. There's this green button right here, and you might have to scroll just a bit depending on your screen size, but this create a new class. And then this gives you the ability, if you're using Google Classroom, you just slap your course code in there, and then set an initial password. I recommend making it something easy, make it be science fair, and then students can change that at any point they wish, but you'll start them out with a common password. If you're not using Google Classroom, you can also do this.
Sorry, before you go on, if I am using Google Classroom, does that automatically then send like a message to my roster of that class?
It does not. I think we've got it set up so it does not notify them, but it creates them, and then you can just tell them, go to dataclassroom.com and click log in, and
type in the same password and you're in.
Yeah, and it'll be their same email, which is their Google email if you do it that way, and then they just put in your common password and then they're in. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Sorry, you were going on with something else without using Google Classroom.
Yeah, if you're not using Google Classroom, so if you're someone who's not doing that, you can do this manually. But I just want to repeat, you do not, in this new members field, you do not need to type in your students' email addresses one at a time. You can copy a whole list from a spreadsheet. So if you have a list of your students' emails, just copy it, one operation, single paste it into that field. Then you do the create class, and then you created accounts for all those students. So a repeat, you do not have to one at a time type in 142 student emails. You can just copy paste those in if you're doing that manually. You can also do your rostering through a learning management system like Clever, Canvas, Schoology, ClassLink, but you will have to request your district to add Data Classroom as an app. Unfortunately, those products don't put that control in the hands of the teachers there. They require a district to actively add them. It's not hard to do. So if you send, do an email introduction between us and your tech person in your district and say, hey, we want you to add Data Classroom as an app, that is super easy to do, and that is free for them to do. But just know that you won't be able to do that on your own. Questions in the chat. Can I see a student's data and work? Yes, if you go through the process to create classes for them. Then when you go to this browse tab at the top of the list, the purple bar here, and you go to data sets, you will see a list, and there's different filters on here. This filter that's called My Classes will show you work that you've created, as well as your work your students have created, and you'll be able to see it. It doesn't go both ways. Your students can't peer into your file list. They can only see data sets that you click share on, and then it will make them visible to your students. But yes, you can go in, and this is quite useful if you've got a student who's working on a project and they're asking you a question about it, and you're on, your computer, and you say, okay, let me just pull up your data set. What's it called, or will I see it in there? And then you can open up a student data set and take a look at it there. Can you input your own data? Yes, it looks like you answered your question on that. But again, just to kind of cover that, on the dashboard, there's this import a data set from your own data. I click import, and there's 4 different options. It's just depending on where the data is coming from. Are you bringing it from Google Drive? Are you uploading it from your computer? That's like a CSV or an Excel file. Do you want to just copy paste it in, which is the fastest? I'll just show that for a second, because say I just want to I'm just going to take a subset of this data, but I could have copied the whole sheet if I wanted. But then I just put my cursor in that field and I paste it in there, and you can see now I've got my own data set in there. So that's a quick copy paste. You can also, I'm gonna go back to the dashboard. I could also take the web address of this Google Sheet. So I'm up here in the URL, and I'm getting the address, and I go back, and when I import here, now I can do this fetch a spreadsheet from Google Drive. I can paste in the web address. You'll have to log in to your Google, because Google's not going to just give out your info unless you give it permission. But once you've done that, and I recommend sharing data sets that are publicly available. If you share a data set with Data Classroom that's publicly available, it'll work very easily. You can share any data set you want, but it will give you, if it's a private data set, it'll give you some scary warnings from Google about like you're opening up your life to Data Classroom. I'll assure you, you're not actually doing that, but Google just has these different tiers of sort of disclosure. So if you do a public data set, you'll get the soft warnings. But now I've brought this in from Google. It also launches me on this checklist to start working with my own data. So you see the data import, everything here is green because we've done this correctly. But the prepare, I've got these little warning signs, and I can click learn more, like, hey, I need to tell the computer what type of variable each column is. Is it numeric? Is it categorical? Is it sample count? And there's a description here to help you through different situations. And then I can go and I can start doing that and say, sex, this is a categorical variable. I've got some empties. Do I want to fill them with NAs, or do I want to leave them empty? I can go in and this is numeric. excuse me, this is numeric, this is numeric. And then, then I can just start playing with my own data in there as well. Because I did this with Google, I made a link, and if I have some new data that I want to bring in, and I want that to be reflected, there's this menu on the left, and you can see down here the fourth option down is reload. And when I click reload, it remembered the address of the Google Sheet, and I click reload, and now it refreshed it, and you see I've got this new variable is in there, and if I wanted to do a histogram with a new variable, it'll look like this. It's a little bit boring as a histogram, maybe a little bit better as a dot plot. So that's yes. The short answer to that question, yes, you can bring in your data. Hopefully you saw a couple of different possibilities for how to do that. Is there a feature for calculating columns? There is. It's a little bit limited right now, but I'll show you what is there. And this is about to become more robust. But like, if I go from this table view and say I'm taking this average court column right here. This is a study from dogs, and this is the stress hormone, corticosterone, I believe. But if I click these three dots that you see next to numeric, I have the ability to transform a column, and I can do it in place, or I can create a new column. And if I create a new column, I have this list of functions. And so what we haven't done yet is the open-ended thing to do like column A minus column B. But what you can do is add and subtract constants. You can log transform, you can exponentially transform, you can divide by a constant. But what's coming soon is that ability of what you asked about to make a formula with, like, column A plus column B equals column C kind of a thing. And then one thing I want to show you for sure before we're out of time, I'm going to pull up a different data set for this. Go back to, we'll do this cicada sex education one. This is a good demo. Yeah, and Stephanie, I see that comment. I think right now that would be your option, is do those calculations in Google Sheets. And even if you decide, after you've already brought in the data set that you want a new column, you could do that in data sheets, and then the refresh would make that easy to bring in. So when you have a group, when you have a graph that is made like this, and this is just the the simplest way we could do this. And again, we have options. We could do this one like this if we wanted, or we could do it like this. These are both acceptable. But if we want to do a statistical test here, there's this button that opens up the graph-driven hypothesis test. And what you might not realize, and what I expect your students certainly won't realize, is if this is the graph that illustrates their question. So maybe their question was, is the average head width different between males and females? This is the graph that both asks and answers that question to some extent. And when you're asking a question about, is there a difference between two groups, and it's exactly two groups, you only have so many choices of statistical tests. And most of the time, the t-test is going to be the test that you want to run in this situation. So when I click this button over here, it will open up this table, and it will say, hey, we've selected a t-test because on your x-axis it's categorical. It has exactly two values. Your y-axis is numeric. And so when we calculate, it'll run that t-test. It'll give you sort of like the least you need to know output. And if you want some more explanation on how you interpret that p-value, you can click this explain, and it frames the question in very mathematical terms, like, is there a significant difference in head width between the two groups, female and male? And then it shows you this p-value. It's very, very low, and it says it means the groups are different. You can see if you play around with the slider, if I even slide it just a little bit, it changes, 0.03 means strong confidence. 0.53 means no evidence. 0.86 means no evidence. But when I let it go, it snaps back to that calculated value. And the rest of the text on this modal is helping students to communicate that appropriately, to not overinterpret it, but also not to underinterpret it, right? To sort of get the idea of what conclusion, that these data support and how strongly they support it. And, just to give you the idea of how this works, maybe one student has produced this graph, but, maybe another student has produced, let's do something totally different. Let's say, maybe another student has produced, let's do this graph, and, let's make it a stacked bar chart. And, one student says, my question was essentially, did we observe the same numbers of males and females across each of my 3 different species groups? Well, that question is a chi-square test of independence question, because it's 2 different categorical variables, species group and sex. And you're wanting to know, do they fit some sort of expectation, where are they dependent on one another, right? That's why it's a test of independence. If you're male or female, are you more or less likely to get a sample from those 3 different species groups? And so when you run this test, now it will run the chi-square test of independence. And when I click calculate, it'll give me my output. And here we get a very high probability of p-value. No evidence that there is a relationship between those. And not surprising, they were basically equal across all of those groups here. So that's how that will work to guide students toward statistical tests. One of the things we have coming soon for this, it'll be out for this school year, is at this point, when they open up this table, if they just go and click calculate, it'll pop up another window saying, something like, do you know why you're using a chi-square? And it'll have more explanation on that. And they'll have the option to make that go away if they don't want to read that, because I imagine more experienced users will not want the full explanation every time. But I think for learners, it will be good to have that there, and they can see, a little bit more background on why it's choosing a given test.
Thank you, Aaron, for joining us today and showing us the platform, and especially for helping us to make it available to all our teachers and students. Could you just take a moment to tell teachers about additional support they can get throughout the school year?
Yeah, so through the school year, we do webinars on almost a monthly basis. And so if you get on our mailing list, those will be emailed out to you when we're doing those. You can also find those under the PD section of our website. And if you ever want to get to the website while you're logged in, you click your name and you can just click the visit the website. It can be confusing, because if you go to dataclassroom.com and you're not logged in, you'll go into the app. But if you're not logged in, you'll go to the website. If you are logged in, you'll go to the app. But you can see we have these free online workshops. And if you go to upcoming workshops, you can also get links to all the past ones that we've done. We don't have any up right now in the middle of summer, but we will be adding some starting in July. So that's available. We also have help resources within the app at all times. The question mark on the purple bar up here will open up this user guide to Data Classroom, and there are all sorts of, like, I'll just open up the graphing section for a second, but you can see there's all sorts of little help tutorials on where to press what buttons and how to do things, some statistical background in different places. And so that's available. And then you can always email us at help@dataclassroom.com as well. And we'll get back to you promptly. We're a pretty small organization, so don't be surprised if it's me personally that's getting back to you. That's how we do things, but it could be someone else on our team as well.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Aaron, one more quick question.
Yeah,
For
go
any
for
of
it.
those things you had, like a graph or something, is there a print button there if I wanted to print that?
There's this little camera icon in the upper right,
Okay.
and you'll see that on a couple of tables. If I click that, it puts this copy done. It's now on my clipboard, and
Yeah.
so if I am working in another document like this one,
Okay.
I can hold on. I gotta move all my Zoom windows, but I can just paste it in to
All right,
wherever
and then
it is
print
that I'm
from there.
working.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks.
Sure.
Great. Thank you, Aaron.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for your questions, everyone, and have a good rest of the day and rest of the summer.
Bye. Thank